Verbal Tap fans, I'm skipping through any intro. I'm too excited. Too excited for today's podcast. The article dropped yesterday. This is Kevin from Verbal Tap. Rav, how are you? I don't care. I got to get to this.
I was like, you cannot intro the guest, but you have to intro me, you dick.
Oh, that's right. Yes. No, every time I was there, I just wanted to get immediately to the article. And
go ahead and talk about the article, Kevin.
I got to take a step back. Look, yesterday was Christmas morning. An article dropped that has two of my Google alerts, MMA and NBA. Somehow Raph is the one who found it first. Sends it over my way. It's ranking best NBA players for MMA, which is a topic I've tried to force you down many times just because I watch too many NBA playoffs.
No.
You went out, found the man that wrote the list. Journalist to journalist, would you like to explain that he has one of the coolest sounding podcasts with Protect Your Neck? He's all over the MMA junkie and sports community, but I'll let you do the official. I'm too excited.
Yes. So, gents, it's always great whenever we can bring on somebody who is in the journalism community of MMA, also a practitioner as well. That's always great. He's also an avid gambler in terms of wanting to bet on fights, which speaks to my heart because, compulsive gambler to compulsive gambler, there's very few times when I don't feel like betting on something. But this gentleman, he wrote an excellent article. He's been covering things for a bit, but we're happy to bring him on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Dan Tom. Dan, how you doing, sir?
Oh, great. Thanks for the intro, Raph and Kevin. Great to be on the Verbal Tap podcast. Really pleasure you guys having me. Thank you.
Well, let's see how long that goes for. Kevin, what is your
checkout question as well?
Because Kevin, when I sent him the article, and we have to be full disclosure here, Kevin's first words weren't of anger. They were of hurt. Kevin, what did you tell me?
I was like, they couldn't have called. I couldn't have had one meeting. And obviously, if anyone knows anything about human psychology, I'm like reading the article giddy. I went through videos. I'd made a meal out of this thing. But my initial reaction was basically jealousy and sadness. I was like, but damn, I wanted to help with this list. So this was a great, Raph could sense it and was like, well, we've got to bring him on. Dan, when you start something like this, where did the idea catch you? We're kind of in between MMA events, but why'd you write it?
Well, basically, again, it's just for fun and kind of like you guys tipped off, in some pre-talk here, just, peeling back the curtain. Yeah, we're all trying to find some content in these weird COVID times, I dare say the hot word there. But I also, prior to these things, I do have a segment along with my analysis because, again, I'm a compulsive gambler analyst. I wouldn't consider myself a journalist. There are journalists. There are some journalists in this space, and they definitely, deserve more respect than me. But if you like, that kind of analysis talk and whatnot, yeah, that's what I specialize in. But yes, back to your question, I did have an ongoing segment called How Would They Do in MMA? The first installment. Again, I'm greedy, guys. I'm going for childhood favorites. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to find ways I can find stuff I would be doing anyways, like revisiting old NBA footage or watching old Van Damme movies. Let's try to make it some work. And I got some good responses from kind of ranking the cast of Bloodsport, one of the first quote-unquote mixed martial arts films, if you will. And I'm like, you know what? With The Last Dance, I'm getting caught up in my 90s nostalgia. I believe I was born in the same year, I dare say, as Kevin is 1985. So, this was a
great year.
This was
just a great year.
And this was a peak for me, guys, because just real quick, as far as my background, even, before/during, but even technically before I got into martial arts, I grew up on two things. That was boxing. Some of my first memories is Meldrick Taylor, Julio Cesar Chavez, and basketball. Some of my first memories, John Paxton hitting a crucial shot against Lakers in '91. But my grandma, who not your typical grandma, not your typical old lady, not your typical old Asian lady, guys. She actually ran a business called Scenic Air Tours and was very successful in Hawaii. But on the side, she would run illegal blackjack games, which me and my nephews, we would shuffle the decks, set the tables to kind of get our allowance, right?
Yeah.
Scrap the podcast. It's now about your grandma.
She was all about basketball, both college and pro, but mainly pro. And she would have a telephone next to her, a notepad, and one of those old school, like not typewriters, but those calculator punchers. And she would take bets, of course, just from people in the community. And I grew up in that room watching sports and watching her take money and take bets. And of course, if she's a basketball fan, by the way, she's a savage, this old lady. Her favorite basketball player was Bill Laimbeer, which tells you something. Like, and she still got it. She's like De Niro from Casino. I'm back in Hawaii to cover Bellator last year, and I don't know shit about football, guys. I'll be clear. And she's like, I'm telling you, I already bet futures on Mahomes. Mahomes is my guy. And sure enough, who takes it last year? So she's a savage or whatever. I'm just watching as an ignorant kid and arbitrary. I should have been looking at Michael Jordan, the best player on the court. Perhaps it's the alliteration of threes, but I'm drawn to number 33, which is a great name, a number in basketball, as you guys know, for many players. And Scottie Pippen became my guy. And whether we're talking about fights or sports, I'm always drawn to the utility players like in basketball or a well-rounded fighter, because those people, it takes a lot of skill and you don't get a lot of credit. And so, yeah, I credit that 90s Bulls run and basketball in short to kind of how I got got into, analyzing sports in the first place.
Well, first of all, we're going to need to get your grandmother's contact information after this if she does podcasts, because she sounds like easily the most interesting guest we would have had, I don't know, ever. And frankly, we've been looking for someone to replace me on the podcast anyway. Finally, sounds like we finally found someone. But I'm having flashbacks to like 94 Knicks. My dad was a Knicks fan, so super brutal. But when we're talking about the obsession we kind of all have, and it sounds like you have it as well, and it sounds like you were raised with it, when you are constantly looking at the betting lines and the next matchup and whatever's going on, when that's gone, you suddenly have all this time to fill. And that's when you start binge watching 10 episodes of The Dance, and we're going to get to the fact that you don't have Michael Jordan on your top 15. Don't worry, fans. We're going to the cross-X is ready. Before that, Raph likes to get to know the guest. Still against it. Want it publicly recorded. But how do you get into fighting and the MMA world? We're kind of always curious as to jiu-jitsu nerds that found it through somehow like a lack of speech competition and turned to jiu-jitsu. But what's your story in that world?
Well, thankfully, before I found out that I wasn't going to be as tall as most of my friends growing up and that the basketball coaches weren't looking my way, thankfully, I already dived into martial arts. I'm a mixed kid. I'm half of a couple Asians and half of a couple Caucasians, to just keep things simple. But yeah, I guess you could say I went more toward the Asian influence there. Got into traditional martial arts. The gateway drug in the 90s, right, was Taekwondo. Not Rex Kwando, thankfully. And although I don't count the black belt because I don't believe any black belts should really be awarded before you're 18. For what it's worth, I did compete and on a regional and national level. My parents would drive me to my mom at least would drive me to the tournaments around this part of the country. So I really got into it for what that's worth, and from there found Chinese Kempo, which was Shaolin Kung Fu based, but you wore the gi because it was more Americanized. These later turned on, I don't know how they've done since, but they later turned into what they were called United Studios of Self-Defense. I think they originated in Massachusetts on the East Coast. They made their over to the West Coast throughout the 90s in that kind of karate run. They were one of the biggest organizations, so big, in fact, they got connections, one of the first to establish connections with the Shaolin Temple, who, because long story short, I'll save you guys the politics in China, they had some rent to pay, and they're not exactly as kind for religious and taxes and write-offs. So the monks you saw, they actually did like a traveling tour through Vegas. They actually ended up coming here, ironically enough. But through my affiliation with that martial arts company, which I did achieve the black belt in that one. I actually went over to China twice, the second time to get it, even though we didn't actually get the ranks because they're not handing any belts over there on Shaolin Temple ground after what the Japanese had done to the Chinese, both in martial arts and history. Again, not trying to dive into that whole, folks, just trying to sum it up. And yeah, I needless to say, traveled everywhere I could to get that knowledge, and got away from it, got into punk rock, got a bunch of tattoos, was in a band for a while, fell out for a second, but ended up working with a dude named Mike Moss, who trained with Gina Carano under Master Toddy, which was a famous Muay Thai teacher out here. And I got into Muay Thai because I always loved Muay Thai from back in the day. It was getting popularized now with mixed martial arts. And through Muay Thai and getting back into mixed martial arts, I actually got back into MMA. Signed up at Extreme Couture's about a year and a half after it opened in 2007 or so, and was treated by being able to see a lot of people come through those ranks. Got to train under guys like Robert Drysdale, who now has his own school out here. Catch wrestling coaches who I reference, like Neil Melanson, as well as coaches who are sadly no longer with us, like Sean Tompkins, albeit briefly, and a better connection with the late great Robert Wallace, who's probably more familiar to your listeners. And yeah, I don't really I think I'm technically unranked in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I have a purple stripe in catch wrestling under Neil, which is the equivalent to a purple belt. And even me being self-deprecating, I will agree with that. As far as my grappling level. But as far as that, man, that's pretty much my martial arts experience. I competed in everything under the sun. Only amateur MMA. I lost a 3-round decision to Marvin Eastman's son. And in camp for my second fight, I got my umpteenth concussion. But the point was it was a bad one, which is why I wear these hipster glasses if you see me on the Junkie videos. And that's how actually why I'm in media now, guys, and why I don't claim to be a journalist, like I said off the top. I got into this by accident. I was going crazy. I could no longer be on the mats. I could no longer fight, compete the way I wanted to. And Robert Wallace, who I mentioned, said, you need to, why don't you break stuff down? You've taught classes here at Extreme Couture before. You're a much better teacher than I was a competitor. And sure enough, I did it on a website, and that website and that blog got attention. And next thing you know, I got jobs, and now I'm working for Junkie. Sorry to ramble there, guys, but that's the history.
That's all right. We'll put you back in. Now, you don't really get to say who's a journalist and who's not, unfortunately, because that is for God. It's more so. I'll start with this question over to you. Dan, do you see the types of people we call journalists in our sport? It's not, the high barometer that we have.
Yes.
So, and it's fun because every once in a while, people will be like, Raph, what are your thoughts on journalism? You're a journalist. And I'm like, I'm a host and I have ideas and policies that I follow. But part of the beauty of being a host on a podcast is you can make or break some of those things. And so I think that's kind of a fun aspect to do. But you, sir, you publish articles on MMA Junkie, a very, very reputable site. I like reading their stuff. But Kev, I guess the issue is here. From our perspective, you have a lot of experience. The one thing that caught me, that concerns me, that I have to ask about is, are you unable to train right now in jiu-jitsu?
As far as health-wise or what's going on in the world?
Nah, health-wise, because I know once we all get back, we're back. Because when you mentioned that you haven't been able to go back to the mats, and I was like, oh shit, is that for everything, including jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, I can. I've gotten to as far as concussion stuff. In fact, only recently, like last week, I kind of had a bit of an episode where I was feeling some symptoms of it. Mm-hmm. But it's really rare these days, to be honest. The only thing that was keeping me off the mats prior was a joint and a torn rotator cuff issue that I'm getting better from. So I'm hoping to actually get back on the mats when like everybody else does, I'm guessing.
Good, man. Okay. That's for my own, like, oh shit, no, I want you to be able to train, my friend. I know how it drives us crazy.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got a whole just smorgasbord of martial arts background, which is always fun. You're in that range before. I mean, people that start now, it's very clear, and I think it's very well known, but it's an interesting journey. Raph, I don't have nearly as many good gone to China to get a black belt stories. I got to work on it. I've got to have my game.
Well, traditional martial arts, obviously is less weighted now. We've kind of seen that transition, but that kind of parlays into the basketball discussion because – it was kind of cool to be able to see, for example, that 90s karate craze going into what we talk about now, right, guys, which is the MMA craze. And keeping with the parallel of basketball here, you could argue that, there are similar things, a lot of similar trade-offs in their own different ways as far as things evolving.
All right. So now we got the background to you. We know a little bit about the person we're going to be asking some questions in regards to this list. Kev, what is your summarization of his list? There are 15 athletes that he said could fare well, or at least analyzes how they would fare in the world of mixed martial arts.
Yeah, well, first, the list, and every time you're wanting to have a fun argument like this, it has to start with somewhere. So the hardest part is always the list creator. But that's why I want to start by bridging, because obviously I've got some Jordan. I have a Russell Westbrook question.
Oh yeah, okay.
We're definitely going to talk a little Ben Wallace as 90s kids.
Yes, totally.
But I want to give the list 3 shout-outs first, Raph, because these stood out to me, and I even said it to you. Number 15, Larry Johnson. I don't know why. I don't know how. But if I were ranking, that's exactly where he'd be. A little too nice to be in the top 14, but just too physically imposing and spent too much time in Vegas not to be on the list. So huge shout-out to the LJ.
The Vegas touch.
The second is DJ Banga. I believe the M's silent. I believe they called it. Yeah. And this is a huge reach, because if you're looking at this list, you're like, I know every one of who the fuck is number 6? Who is DJ Banga? It sounds like someone that would be a hip hop artist now, like Pitbull. But the reason he's number 6 is the best reason anyone has ever had a reason for being this. It's an effing black belt in judo. And I have to agree, that gives you an early. We haven't had a lot of black belts in a real martial art. Sorry, real martial art. In a judo type martial art in the NBA. That one's great.
And not to sidetrack you or anything like that, just a quick add in. I will say, yes, also because if we were taking this list seriously, which hopefully I saw some people take this list way too seriously, first of all. So hopefully you didn't take it too seriously.
No,
I'm not saying it as a cop-out, just being real. But if we were to take it somewhat seriously, guys, what would be the criticism, regardless of who you make an argument for? The gaping hole would be the ground game. So again, having a black belt in a ground art kind of will put you head and shoulders against the potential of others. But sorry, go on.
Especially judo. It's like, it'll knock your breath out. It's like, we're not just talking about a wrestler. It's not just going to suck. Like, it's definitely going to hurt on the way down. Last, and Raph, this one just really spoke to me as a Willis Reed in the number 1 spot. You just gotta give points. I believe these lists serve 2 purposes. One, just as a fun launch pad for Twitter to apparently take it too seriously, though that doesn't sound like Twitter to me. But the second is to educate the kids out there. And if you didn't know who Willis Reed is, you don't know like what a train of a man he was. So good early model for Oakley, who's obviously on this list. But those were the 3 things that stood out to me as dead on the money.
I love it. And before you go on, and feel free to launch any complaints, and we'll talk about it. But I just want to add on real quick, because you said it as far as you with Willis Reed. Not so much the selection, although you obviously appreciate it, but more so kind of educating the kids, whether it's about our generation or the generation that came before us. Like, I hate to sound like an old guy, but like, this was pre-internet days when I had to wait for the TV Guide guys in a Sunday paper with my highlighter. Thankfully, we got WGN, so I got all the Bulls. I got all the Bulls stuff highlighted for my week. But what I would also do is I would take my own stats, because, again, I was such a Pippen fan, and I was like, they're underrated. They're not giving him enough credit. So I would actually purposely take stats and compare the next morning. And I always found that Pippen on average would be missing stats if something was wrong, and Jordan on average would be gaining stats if something was wrong. That's kind of beyond the point there. But the point was, but the point was to find out about the old school Celtics or the old school Knicks and these legendary teams. Like, you couldn't just go on YouTube back then in the 90s. You had to you had to stay up late, wait for the NBA Classics to come on, if you were lucky enough to have the channel. And I don't think it was like a crazy like dish channel or anything, but it was a cable channel that you had to pay for, and you had to go and watch these like almost like, series play out. So yeah, man, like that was a big part of my list as far as, and we'll talk about it as far as why certain guys made it and why it's probably more centric to the 80s and 90s. Is because people don't, I was worried that people don't realize a certain playing of basketball, and perhaps we'll touch about it when we get to Larry Bird. But I was like, again, you don't have to think I'm not saying Larry Bird's a badass so that he would wipe out an MMA division. That's not what I'm saying. But for people not realizing that, like, Larry Bird fist fought more than your favorite player of today, kids, I don't.
A lot.
Do you,
like
stop.
A lot.
There's
Stop,
a category here.
Keyboard.
How many fights were you in has to be a category.
That was a huge. As you can tell, how well you play defense and how well and did you actually fight seems to be a common thread, right, guys? I mean, there's a lot of Lakers love as far as the pictures.
I did notice.
The editor shows,
I noticed the Lakers love. I tried to just skate past it.
I'm just fine with that.
Well, for me, I'm more of an East Coast guy, whether we're talking about hip hop, basketball, or whatever. So for me, like the heart of the list was East Coast power forwards, defenders, or you actually got in fights on the basketball court. The Lakers' common thread, albeit, there's probably technically 4 Lakers on there if you're going by my book. We don't have to get into that divvying math right now. But the Lakers' common thread that was interesting is they actually had the most martial artists. So if you had a martial artist or ties to martial artists, you probably made the list. Like there was one guy actually who almost didn't. Forgive me his name, the Canadian guy. Was it Chad Murray? I forget, but him and Kareem will be the 2 guys that'll actually come up with the most Bruce Lee quotes next to Kobe, which I tried to include to justify that I wasn't just putting his name in there to put his name in there.
I appreciate that. And here's what I'm going to say as the resident Los Angeles sports guy. I would tell you this checks out. I have some questions. I will go and circle on the first, which is for somebody who loves Scottie Pippen so much. Not on this list. Did he have a migraine? Is that what
Did you dock him points
Scotty.
For toughness? Give it to us.
Well, the fight promoters would have loved Scotty because he would have been on that Contender Series pay as a champion. Like he would have been making Contender Series paydays as a double champ. Poor Scotty. So great point there. But no, one thing I tend to do, which we could talk about with the Michael, if you want to lead into this too, I try to, and this is a bad habit from my days of coaching martial arts. If I really like a student or I really like a player, I'm going to grade them on a higher curve. It's not right. I'm not saying people should do it. I'm not saying I'm right by doing it, guys. I'm just being honest and transparent as to my process. And that was kind of the process here. And he has some really badass moments. Like I credit, his dunk over Ewing. Apologies to your father, who's a Knicks fan, but that dunk over in '94, no less. But that dunk over Ewing, I say it on Twitter all the time. It's the NBA equivalent to a Mark Hunt walk-off KO, and especially with the addition of what he does to Spike after. Like, yes, in basketball terms, that could earn him on the list. And if someone else was doing this list, I would be secretly, back to what you were saying, Kevin, making a party of it. I would be hoping that I would see Scotty on the list. So yeah, I guess
reach,
overcorrect.
Great reach, just really good hand-eye, fantastic defense. There's a case to be made.
Now,
overachiever. He's an overachiever for sure.
Champ,
you look at him as a freaking
champ.
ball boy. They called him the equipment manager, which was kind. He was a ball boy, folks, and now he's one of the greatest players. Give the man some respect.
Now, if we're talking on stuff that we can actually compare in terms of martial arts, you have Shaq at 10 and Charles Barkley at 7. Do you need some inside the NBA footage that we can hook you up with? Because I don't know if you've seen those 2 grapple before.
It's ugly.
I don't know that Charles Barkley's getting the best of them.
Well, it's hard. Barkley hit like this soft curve, right? Both personally and in his playing curve, right? Maybe it goes to back injuries, although that doesn't, there's probably some head injuries with the shit that he's been saying on the mic since before he stopped playing basketball. But you guys get what I'm talking about. And it was kind of weird. I think they used like a Rockets photo, and I was worried they were going to use a Suns photo. But if you read it, I'm talking about 76ers Barkley. If you notice, I'm specifically going out of my way to cite and link fights to that team because – perhaps we'll get to it on why like certain guys like Ben Wallace don't get reach. When I'm doing who was on my list for what it's worth as far as my notes. If I were to show you my notes,
I have you'll get a chance because I have the 6 snubs. I ranked them,
cool.
And I'm curious if you think it's fair. If you have anyone else that's missed, because before we get to the 6 snubs, because I think that's going to be the fun. I'll throw some questions at you about the actual order, which Raf's already hit the big one, which Shaq credits his NBA game to MMA, which I don't know.
I think that's Shaq just kind of talking to be Shaq. I don't know which one. Was it you, Kevin? I sensed some Lakers hatership, and me and
Correct.
You. It's funny. It's like I only hate the Shaq iteration of the Lakers, and really the only other player besides Shaq I had a problem with was Rick Fox, who seemed like his only job was to get into fights with a Portland Trailblazer, Scottie Pippen. Neither here nor there. But I think that Shaq just being Shaq. I'm not, as I kind of alluded to in the article, I'm not a big Shaq fan, and I just think that's a lot of it is machismo. Whether you look at him, quote unquote, angry, throwing that sucker punch at Brad Miller, which, and I'm not saying Brad Miller didn't deserve it. That's a whole nother conversation. But I'm just saying for the clip and the punch itself, if we're talking about martial artists, even just with the grappling, if you go and watch the video I linked, the more recent footage, him grappling with Forrest Griffin and like calling Griffin the strongest man he's ever faced, like he it's pretty much what I suspected as a kid. And even though I was a stupid kid, I suspected money's going to ruin the NBA, which was true. The LA had some worse working for him in the early 2000s, which was true. Don't tell me Tim Donaghy was the only mobbed up fucking ref. And another thing that was true was that you put people at the same size as Shaq, they're going to walk all over him. Shaq has that turnaround jumper to the right side, which is an impressive shot off the baseline. But what the fuck else does he hit besides at that distance, aside from the occasional free throw? And a lot of Shaq hate's coming out of me, and I apologize. But the point is when you talk about the Charles Barkley, I also linked that in his article. It links to both Charles and Shaq kind of, showing some really uncomfortable Chinese racism, especially in today's specs. Going back to the 90s, I'm like, okay, well, I didn't remember that. But but the more prevalent point was what happened when Shaq faced a rookie, Yao Ming, who, body gave out on him, so it's kind of unfair to judge his career, but by the standards and precedents set by an enormous country, there was a big standard set on the guy, and you can argue that he underperformed in many areas, yet, for whatever reason, he averaged his best statistics in multiple columns against and Shaq is one of the greatest, folks.
I like this. This is my favorite of your hot takes so far. Yao Ming was better than Shaq is my favorite.
He averaged better than his average statistics, specifically against one player, which is kind of an anomaly from a statistical standpoint alone. Forget who we're comparing here, guys. But the fact that he did that against Shaq. Now, obviously, we can go into games, careers, and yes, Shaq's going to trounce in so many categories. I'm not denying that. But the point was, what was Shaq's explanation? If it wasn't a big deal, why was Shaq so shooken up? Because A, he certainly was. And B, another point you can't deny, B, what was his excuse for it? He was so big. Oh, the guy that uses his size throughout life, not just being an athlete, but a big guy, having the way paved for you. Your precious ego could not take, being challenged by a rookie who you should have been wiped.
First of all, Shaq's gauge was a little empty on Diesel at that time.
True.
We all understand that. But number two, I would go ahead and counterpoint that with, have you seen him as a rapping genie?
Oh, Jesus.
No.
His feet are light. They're just light.
Just light. And second of all, the man is steel. There is video evidence of him being steel. So he fought crime. I thought that was another way to judge part of his form that I just felt was
stage combat. Right? Stage combat's important.
It's very important, Kevin.
Well, I have a question for both of you. Raph, because one of the things I was looking at this list, I was like, which NBA player is going to be the most mad about their ranking? And because I can see an argument, which is why they're on this list. But Raph, who do you think's the maddest about their position? And
that's a great question.
I have one on mine, and then I'll go to Dan. But Raph, you want to lead us off?
I was saying it was LeBron, because LeBron's probably sitting here right now and thinking God damn it, you guys can't even just respect the greatness that you're seeing right now. I have King in front of my name. You know the other person who has King? Gordon Ryan. We're one and the same. Put me higher.
LeBron's an interesting. It's going to be a really passive-aggressive Instagram post if it does come out.
I would think LeBron. I wasn't thinking LeBron, but now that you mention it, I would also say LeBron would be upset that because all the Jordan talk, and he's probably, I'm guessing, along the Gen Pop is losing that just because of, I don't want to say recency bias because he's the more recent and relevant player, obviously. But he has to deal with that, in other words, and now he's got to see Kobe ranked a slot above him too. Is he going to get any love in his eyes?
Who's yours, Dan? You wrote the list. Yeah.
For me, in researching this list, somebody wrote on their list, which of course was not my take. I have my own takes, but their take was I put Bill Laimbeer on the list for fear that he would find me. Well, I'll tell you this, because I thought of this question, which parlays into this answer, is it's going to be Charles Oakley, because out of everybody, and there are some young guys on here like LeBron or DJ Benga is still young enough to be banging, right? Look at that athletic specimen. But Charles Oakley is the only guy who turns old and is still scary. Like I referenced, like he's still getting in altercations in the Garden, like it as recently as 2017. Guys, that's roughly a 30-year span of getting into fights in the Garden, and that's just the ones we know about. Charles Oakley terrifies me, guys. Oakley is a mother. Oakley, I have so much of everybody I researched too, by the way, guys. My respect gained most for Oakley out of all this research. I am such a fucking Charles Oakley fan now. Not that I wasn't a fan before, but yeah.
I think it's the Oak too, but I want to make an argument for Dennis Rodman, and there's only one reason. Raph, would you like to inform the public about what he spent his spare time doing?
Well, you know what's great? Not only was it Carmen Electra, but it's the fact that I think there's nothing funnier than looking at a Michael Jordan documentary and going, wow, Carmen Electra made it in this. Jesus.
And she's excellent.
Time.
Wow.
And she's
great.
She's more valuable in that documentary than Justin Timberlake ever had business being in it. So get the fuck out of here, JT. But I'll tell you, the one thing that I will say about your Dennis Rodman pick, it's maybe a little low, and I think it's because you're overlooking his clear use of NWO practices. I believe his use of the diamond cutter is steps above most people. Not only does it show good offense, but it can be hit from anywhere. More importantly, he has a couple wins under his belt with the NWO. So I'm just saying, think about your posse that you've got backing you up too. This man rode deep, and there's nobody better than Hollywood Hulk Hogan. That's going to show you the ropes on how to be a bad guy. Biggest heel turn of all time.
Great point.
I'll add a psychological factor. For fighters, sometimes that weirdness, like when they would color their hair or just do like paint their nails. Can you imagine what that mother effer is going to show up to the cage in? I can't. I honestly don't know. It might be an 80s leotard. It might be a wedding dress.
Fighter to show up walking down the aisle in the wedding dress.
He would lick someone if they were on the ground. He just would.
You guys think Melvin Gillard was a Rodman fan?
I do, actually. Is, was, and will be.
I saw Adesanya dye his hair too recently, but I'm glad you guys picked up on the showmanship stuff. And you know what, Raph, I actually wanted to put a better shout in there for the pro wrestling. But yeah, no, man, I remember watching that. Like, I was really lucky. I'm like, man, the time I was following basketball the most was the 90s and this quote-unquote Bulls era. I'll let the 80s people, if they want to consider that their golden era, I'm not going to fight them on it. But I also was able to watch WCW and WWF during these times, which I'm not a huge pro wrestling guy. I don't hate it. But I just don't follow it for the last 10 to 20 years. But I did watch hardcore at that time. So it was kind of crazy. Like I picked the two like right things to follow that kind of coincided for a brief second. That was awesome.
I just love the fact that when they then get to Carmen Electra's story, you go, there she is. Good for her. And then they get to that point where they go, yeah, remember when Dennis Rodman had the moment where he went away to go play with the NWO, and I was like, oh my God, that's right.
I forgot it was like, during the championship.
Yes.
I mean,
did forget that.
I remembered it back then, but now looking back 20 years ago, you're just like, holy shit, that's right, he did do that.
Can you effing imagine if, like,
in context,
Steph Curry is hanging out at the pro wrestling event in between games 4 and 5? It would be insane.
Even in general, just like even like when they're doing their chill airplane rides between games 1 and 2 in the NBA finals, like you see Jordan, all them like smoking, drinking beers, and I'm like, wait a minute, like as crazy and degenerate as the athletes and criminal records and all the things you can lob at the people that fight MMA, most of them are like, all right, got a fight sign, next 3 months, I'm a saint. I'm not touching anything. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And even going back to the boxing days, like I'm not having sex. Like NBA players, for being elite athletes, even in, an age where internet's coming about and whatnot, they really were just rock stars, man. They didn't give a two Fs.
Right. Yeah. And okay, I've got one more comment about the list before I move to my top 5. Happiest about their position. And this is easy. It's number 11, Ron Artest, then Meta World Peace, now Meta Stanford Artest. He is the only one that's like, thank God I'm not number 1. Because if you haven't, you need to Google Malice in the Palace. This is just a message to the world. He is the only NBA player I have seen outside of someone on my list strike a fan. and not just strike a fan, but start an all-out brawl in Detroit, Indiana. It was bound to happen, but Ron Artest is definitely like, thanks for keeping me out of the top 10, Dan. Appreciate the image consulting. Whew. Don't even remember that Malice in the Palace thing. Who was that? So that's my happiest about his position.
That's an interesting take. Yeah, he was one of those borderline ones, and I kind of reference it. But you not that I support the Malice in the Palace, but you can't deny that piece of history, right? But like
you cannot.
Players like
they've tried.
Whereas like players like as volatile like a Latrell Sprewell or something didn't make it, or Allen Iverson, who both I considered. And Allen Iverson, man, I ended up watching a documentary about all that pre-stuff before he got into the league. I didn't know anything about that incident. Like I Googled that bowling alley stuff and it just depressed me. Like some of these things, that's another reason why people, spoiler alert, may not make the list, because sometimes their criminal record or the things they went through was just it was too real. I'm like, there's not enough fighting outside of this really depressing and race-infused stuff. I'd rather not.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, Raph, may I get to my list? Have I waited long enough?
You do it. The floor is yours.
Okay. I want to give honorable mention to Stephen Thompson, who is called Captain Jack, but if you listen to the NBA podcast, players are petrified of him. He was traded multiple times. That's always a bad sign.
Yes.
After winning the title in San Antonio, he was traded. That's how much of a head case Captain Jack was. Also a part of the Malice in the Palace. But he gets just an honorable mention. So here are my top 5. Number 5, to me, this is a potential and a current body build pick, Zion Williamson. I have a clear... That guy, can you imagine if you had to fight in a cage against someone that size?
Yeah. Yep, athletic potential. He was one of the names I jotted down when I made the list broad at first and before I started whittling down. Just based on pure athletic potential was the premise there.
Maybe too nice. I don't know. Time will tell.
That's the hard thing, and I won't sidetrack you from the rest of your list here. Just really quickly, I'll just say that was the hard thing when you want to base. Putting someone on list based on their athletic potential when we're talking about a pool of high-level athletes, it gets a little dicey. It's like, well, I kind of already have it covered here with this guy. Well, technically I have it covered with all the guys in a certain way, but yeah, sorry, go on. But great shout. Great shout.
No, this is my favorite. I mean, you can't make a list unless someone does, which is why this is so damn fun. Ben Wallace at number 4. We're all 90s kids. I recall him to be the biggest human being I'd ever seen. I can't get out. Sheed's on here. We've got a lot of good Pistons, but I had a specific where I was like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar versus Ben Wallace.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. I think Ben Wallace is going to be your favorite there. Ben Wallace was probably, I want to say, one of the closest to making this list, if it makes you feel any better. It just, another thing, is if I could get away with mentioning him, whether it was Rasheed Wallace being a teammate, involvement with Ron Artest, the Malice in the Palace, who was on the list.
Sheed was there too.
Right. Or the fact that he was mentored, which I do mention, which is the only shout I was able to give Ben Wallace, mentored by Charles Oakley, who is the motherfucker of motherfuckers, right? That's kind of what got him off the list as far as when I really had to split hairs. And then also you look at it again, what's the common thread here, guys? Our defensive players. Well, what is Ben Wallace's strongest standpoint? I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 4-time defensive player of the year. Well, again, I already had that box checked off with Dikembe Mutombo, who also has a 4-time defensive player of the year, as well as upwards of 25 plus recorded injuries with his elbow. So obviously Mutombo, based on respect, elder age, and some elbow injuries, he's going to get the bump. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying you got to agree with it, because Ben Wallace is a great shout, and he almost made my list. I'm just explaining that was the thought process behind him and a lot of guys.
Ben Wallace is, for the kids out there, he's like Dwight Howard without any of the whining, basically.
Scary guy.
Much larger arms. If you played NBA 2K, like the Kobe version, you always would go with the Pistons just so you could have Ben Wallace's defense. So
yes.
That's game shout out. This one's third on my list. Also, person that's gotten into some altercations with fans. Russell Westbrook.
He came up on the list as well with Zion. I think I picked like there were, I can't remember which was first, but when I was kind of on that athlete train of thought, so to speak, as far as guys with athletic potential, well, not just athletic potential, explosiveness, whether it be explosiveness to on or off the court, right?
I was going to say,
in that case,
does
he's
meanness
definitely right up there, man. But he, again, I'm already getting guys like, from name value like LeBron and Kobe, particularly LeBron, who really there's no defense of putting LeBron there besides his athletic potential, which I tried to explain a little bit more in his early career, what he could have done and was scouted for. So that was kind of I kind of used my LeBron for like a cop out if I'm just going strictly toward athletic potential, because maybe I'm a hipster guy or I'm a martial artist at heart. I just felt like if it was a cop out if I just start picking the most muscly, impressive guys, and obviously Westbrook, Ben Wallace, much more than those descriptions. I'm not trying to take a shot at them. I'm just saying, if I'm having to split hairs, that's not saying you got to agree with it, but yeah, that was the process.
Well, Russell had a factor that I like to ask. Raph, how much should I factor in hatred of the media into a player's if they really hate the media?
Are we talking are we talking prime or are we talking right now?
We're talking right now. This is the Westbrook angle. I was like, would kick a fan, has definitely like straight up only gotten to fisticuffs with the Utah racist, and hates the media, won't talk to them, despises them, and is super mean.
If you're calling a bookie, say you're calling Dan grandma right now, and she asks, well, how much do they hate the media? I'm thinking, how much is that going to play into the betting line?
Yeah.
So it's tough, Kev. I don't know that it's going to get you anywhere, but it could also be the fuel that if you can't hit the fan, that it makes you even madder.
Well, and I just tried to factor in anger towards freedom of speech as one of my categories. This one's going to make Oak proud. I have Anthony Mason number 2 on my list.
Yes.
Silent assassin, mean as hell, and prepared to go to jail over a rebound.
I think Anthony Mason was probably number 1 and Ben Wallace was number 2 if I'm like having to rank the honorable mentions as far as in line.
Nice.
For whatever that's worth. Again, you don't got to forgive me or agree, but that's where I had it. And with Anthony Mason too, again, I was going to have a chance to mention it with Rodman, because one of his most memorable ones is, he's been in some tussles, but that chokehold for me, at least, in my era of fandom, obviously, Kev, it was in my mind, so I wanted to give that a shout. And I think he comes up in other, in other altercations or other people's highlight reels as well, whether it's teammates or opposition, like you mentioned, Oakley and whatnot. So yeah, I really wanted to throw Mason and Larry Johnson. I was juggling, and if you don't got Van Gundy hanging on to Morning's leg, perhaps then Mason does make it over Johnson in that case.
It's just people. Charles Oakley and Anthony Mason were on the same team. That must have been a fun paint to try and head into. Later traded for Larry Johnson. Fun fact. So you probably have him right on the list here. Number 1, easy. Hito Turkoglu. You've got to have a European with a sketchy history. I'm joking. It's Jordan. It's easily Jordan. It's not.
I thought you were going to say George Mirasan next, or like, and then I was joking with somebody. I did a similar one where I was like, I was going to go with Vinny Del Negro, but
Darko Milic, done time, super depressed. No, I've got to go with Jordan.
Now, why, Kevin?
2-sport athlete, great hand-eye, punched Steve Kerr, which tells me, in addition, if you've punched multiple teammates, if the number one thing your teammates are like, oh, yeah, he'd check you if you need it. It's like, what do you mean check? It's like, you getting fisticuffs. He once broke into a hotel room and dragged number 5 on the list out of an ecstasy-filled suite, dripping with kamikazes, and, as we've already talked about, high-rate porn stars. That type of bravada has to at least get you, somewhere in the 14
Kev,
range.
Can I add one thing that I learned from The Last Dance? And not even learned, but just refreshed in a different way, which is, I think, the real reason why he would make the list. And this comes to a criteria of, well, what kind of athlete are they? How can you mold them? How can you shape them? More than any of that, I want you to try imagining telling Michael Jordan he couldn't succeed at something.
Hey, Charles Barkley's number 7. Where are you at, Priss? He would lose his mind. But I also want to give Dan the Stones Journalism Award of the Year. I don't know if that's an official thing, but
Sure.
during this tornado cloud of Jordan coverage, I look at all 15 waiting. And when I got to Willis Reed, I was like, I love this man. I love that Jordan's not on this list. Everyone can go F themselves. He said he was a Scottie Pippen fan up front. He said it.
Yep.
And so, Dan, you get my Stones Award of the Year. I don't know if that makes you feel better, but.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I did state my Scottie Pippen fandom in front of my profile, and also stated I was going to be steering away from my Bulls bias in the beginning of the article. But, hey, as a Scottie Pippen fan, or I got to imagine as really any fan of who had the unfortunate fate of going against Jordan, did it as much as, the guy deserves his credit and this last dance has been fun. I am no hater. I'm not letting somebody I'm not letting the final cut ruin it for me or anything like that. That being said, hasn't the guy gotten enough credit? We can give some love to other people, from historical census to supporting cast members. Let's spread the love around.
That's why the Willis Reed was like a fresh left hook to my jaw, just of joy. I was like, yes.
Yeah, I'm also going to tell you the same thing I told Kevin, which is you try telling Jordan that.
Yes,
if you're
that's a
like, hey,
great
man,
point.
let's go ahead and circle around to some other people. And Michael Jordan being like, I'm sorry, do they have commercials where they're supposed to be like them? Because still me is last time I checked. I just know this. And this is the thing that I laugh so hard about when I'm watching The Last Dance, which is everybody is glamorizing all these things. And then I have this one moment where I go, ugh, Space Jam really did play a role in all of this. And I will not forgive people on this one thing. I don't like Space Jam. I don't.
Yeah.
And I love basketball. I love basketball in the 90s. I love the fact that they had elements of things working like that. I thought those were cute cartoons. But an hour and 30 minutes of sucking Michael Jordan's cock is just too much. It is.
I'm in.
I can't do it. Every character development and exposition is just no. So now I've had so much fun to tell people when LeBron's going to do it. I go, oh, good. Another excuse to get on the train of, we love you, LeBron. We can't do anything. We can't function without you. And I might tell you this much, though. And Kev, I haven't said this one publicly. LeBron could actually possibly outact Michael Jordan. I think he could actually have a better movie. He has a better director, too.
We'll see. He was terrible in Trainwreck.
I feel like if this goes through, that Raph may end up hating LeBron as much as I hate Shaq after that.
Just listen, dude. Here's Kevin. Kevin will tell you on the show the trajectory went from, wow, I don't care. LeBron is very talented,
Right.
but when people tell you, hey, man, you gotta like LeBron, I was like, I don't have to. I really
I'm with
do
that.
not. And
I'm with
even if we're on the same side on a number of things, he could put a post up and I was like, I agree with his point of view, just not, him.
And on the note of Space Jam and being / not being a hater, just so people don't think I'm a Jordan hater, can I tell you my favorite part of Last Dance and why, rounding back to why Jordan actually could have been on this list, not just because he's Jordan, was because the competitive part that people rumored or, we're quote unquote worried. What are the fans going to think of Jordan when they see this side of him? I love that shit. Unfilter it. Give it to me raw.
Well,
it's not going to make me make the guy like the guy less or more. I just appreciated seeing that understanding. One of my favorite scenes, which is why he had that mind, not just from early career, getting hurt, taking the bumps and showing to be able to come back, going to the weight room, coming back with the vigor. You need that attitude as a fighter. But what I love about that, the best part about the Space Jam, obviously the movie sucked, but was that he used it as an excuse to have them built him a whole basketball arena where he flew guys in, and they're like, oh, we get the celebrity basketball, things are paid for. He's dangling wolf tickets over their head, while in reality he's leading them to the slaughter. He's just sitting there scouting them. He's having the games recorded. He's doing homework in the off season. He's supposed to be shooting a movie and he's plotting to fuck these guys up. How do you not appreciate that?
I loved every element of that because like I said, Space Jam as a movie does not really compute for me. Space Jam, the soundtrack, A+. But the issue that I had was I was like, I don't see why this exists. And then to find out all these years later that he was using it for a secret, nebulous sort of reason, I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's worth spending, I guess, $200 million in investing in a new technology just so he could have a scouting camp? Yeah, sure, why not? Good for you. I would tell you, though, the only thing that you say about the Raw and the Unfiltered is just the fact that Michael Jordan was producing this makes me go like, okay, dude, I know you probably wouldn't be this forthcoming about some of these things if you didn't have a hand in it, but man, would I'd love to see someone press a little bit more on some of those ones, because some of those like plot points, especially when they talk about the him and Kerr fight, at the end they go, and it was just a misunderstanding, and just happened.
Well, yeah, and that bullying actually would be another thing that gets him on the list, but you look at it, and he even admits it himself. He's like, I fought the smallest guy on the team. And you're like, wait a minute. When he actually fought, it was the smallest guy on the team. And yeah, he's gotten into some scuffles on the court. But one of the people who, if Ben Wallace, who was the other name, Anthony Mason, the top three guys who almost made the list, the other one would be Robert Parish, who is the chief of the Celtics. It's called the chief because he handled himself accordingly. He didn't really act out, which is why he didn't make the list. But I did reference a time where he knocked out Bill Laimbeer pretty much with a hammer fist that I linked in the Bill Laimbeer section. Yeah. But also Parish's later years when he was an old man in the 90s. I mean, this guy has got, I think, like the record for the longest gameplay. He surpassed Kareem. He was on the Bulls for a certain extent of that season where Jordan came back from baseball. And Jordan was doing his things and doing his barking that he normally did that we saw a bit in the documentary. Apparently did it to Parish. And there's a story. Parish stood up and said, "What did you say?" And Jordan pretty much said something that you better start playing hard or getting with it. Otherwise, I'm going to straighten you out. And Parish essentially just took another step closer in his face and said, "No, you won't." Mm-hmm. And Jordan didn't do shit. And he walked away and pretty much punked him out. So I was like, yeah. Jordan ain't making the list if Parish ain't making the list.
Great reasoning. I just like the fact that, to put this in context, if you've made it this far and you really aren't NBA, bless you. Yes. But to let the kids know, it'd be like John Jones going up to Khabib and being like, hey, I want your championship too. And then Khabib going like, send location. And then somebody going like, oh shit, can't really be the GOAT if he doesn't do a double class. Let alone, we're talking double class, go up one.
Exactly. Whereas a lot of people on the top five, would fight guys that are bigger than him and didn't care. Like Charles Oakley, who I saw an interview recently with him and Scottie Pippen, and Michael Rappaport essentially asked them both, like, is there a player that like was stronger than you thought or scarier than you thought? And I can't do it justice, but Oakley, like, not even trying to be cool or tough, just genuine, was like, that's like, he couldn't compute it. He's like, wait, somebody stronger or scarier on the court than me? No, I've never ran into that. Are you crazy? Like, he thought, like, he genuinely couldn't compute the question of someone being stronger or scarier than him. He's like, no, that person doesn't exist. Like, Oakley has the mentality of a fighter, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Well, let's start to ask this. We're going to broaden this back up. That was an excellent discussion on the NBA. I want to get your thoughts, man, because obviously we're having the same situation of, listen, dude, we want the fights to come back. We don't want people to be dumb. We're conflicted, but you're finding good ways to entertain people. Are there any fights that you're looking forward to? Are you looking forward to the theoretical fight island still being used, even though we might not even need it anymore?
Yeah, man, it's sounding like that's getting dampered for sure the past couple of weeks, which is a good thing. I mean, ultimately, best case scenario for the world and even for fights fans, obviously, is that we don't need it, because that means a lot of things will be going the proper way.
Don't tell Dana that, though.
Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, selfishly, would I love to see, their version of Bodog on the beach? Absolutely, man. I would love to see that. That would be fun, selfishly, right? Yeah. As far as fights, it's interesting. It's a weird time. I'm warning people to just kind of temper their matchmaking, their expectations, given the state of things, and fighters not being able to, put together proper camps, still travel with a sense of certainty. So I'm less down on the performances as we've seen so far. We've still seen some pretty good performances, but I think this weekend's going to tell us a lot as far as performances and a preview of what we're going to have for matchmaking for a while.
I will tell you this. The wanting to step up is very admirable. And that to me was really nothing better exemplified than one of my friends, Gabe Green. He's going to be taking on, I was with D-Rod over here also. Kind of two SoCal guys are going to go face to face. And I couldn't be happier because I felt bad for D-Rod because he's training over with like Donald Cerrone and all these guys, Joe Schilling. Yeah. And he was mid-flight when they said that Holland was out. And I was like, fuck, that's going to be a terrible thing to see in the media when you get off that flight. That's going to be terrible. And he was bummed, and he goes, hopefully they find a replacement. 3 hours later, a guy who's an undefeated guy out here in SoCal who's just been tearing it up volunteers to come in. And I can't tell you how excited I am about that fight. I was like, how did we fall into that fight? That's an amazing fight. So, it's a little columns of A and B where I'm happy that some of the guys who were going to step up might get the shine that they may not have gotten elsewhere. And I'm kind of, temper expectations in terms of like, listen, we're all doing what we're doing to get by. Good for them. It looks like there's going to be 4 or 5 different cards that they're going to try and put together over the next month and a half. So that's good. I just always wonder, especially when you're on the other side and you have to see this week after week, is there anyone that's getting you excited? Because after losing Khabib and Ferguson, that's one that people just kind of go,
Yeah, man, that kind of killed it for me, to be honest. That being said, as far as interesting matchups go, the eventual one from that will be exciting when it gets matched up and eventually, which will be Gaethje and Khabib. I'm not even, I'm so over the welterweight drama series. I feel like they just need to get that picture moving and just pair up Edwards and Usman. And, these guys like the McGregors and Diaz's of the world, they can fight each other or generate interesting fights, on their own. I guess one that just recently got announced before we jumped on here, guys, was Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo for the vacant bantamweight title. Obviously, that's going to spark a lot of feelings as far as whether it's deserved or not. Obviously, Aldo's great. Obviously, he doesn't deserve a title shot, though. That being said, as a matchup, that's pretty darn exciting because Aldo has shown that, he can compete for 3 rounds at least at the bantamweight level. And Peter Yan, he's a hardcore and analyst favorite. There's nothing not to like about him.
Agree. Well, I think what we're going to do, we're going to circle. We're going to start to wrap this up. But obviously, you've endeared yourself to us here, especially in the fact that, listen, I've never seen Kevin get this excited about an article tangentially related to MMA. But enough where he was like, shut up, we're doing a whole episode on this. And I was like, all right, I guess we will. So you really revitalized
thank you
him.
All. Thanks to everyone. It's just it's a dream come true this summer.
Dude, if honestly, knowing that it did that for at least one person made that article worthwhile. If I just was able to trigger nostalgia and send you down the same rabbit holes that it sent me down, that makes it all worthwhile. Thank you guys. That means a lot.
Well, why don't we go ahead and tell the people where can they find you, where can they see you, and let them know where they can get more of this good.
You can find me on Twitter where I post everything there at DanTomMMA. You can always follow my podcast, the Protect Your Neck Podcast, at the PYN Podcast on all social platforms. You can subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts or many other RSS podcast platforms where I break down fights, recap, do top 5 shows. And all those are also available on my YouTube channel, which you can also subscribe to for free. Daniel Tom MMA for that. Dude, thank you guys so much. This was such a fun conversation, and hope to chat with you guys down the future because I respect your podcast and respect you guys and the podcast even more now that I actually got to talk to you guys.
I appreciate that. That's very nice. Kev, do you have any departing words?
We'll be bothering you again soon. A few articles get me to spur and be like, who's off the list? What's my 5? Where are my 15? And thankfully, I was really mentally checked out of some meetings, and this was something to think about. So we will for sure be bothering you again in the future. But Verbal Tap fans, thank you so much to Dan Tom MMA.
The number you have dialed has been changed. The new number is... Please note, the new number is